My name is Martin Summerfield, and just bringing together some of the threads from a workshop that was run yesterday on the 8th of April with the British Energy Coast Business Cluster. So the theme was around well-being, and it was a mixture of three aims we had. The first one was to increase people's understanding of what happens when we face challenge and difficulty. The second aspect was to share some tools and some approaches that may be useful. And the third aspect was to provide a space for peers to check in with each other. Started off with a tiny bit of background on myself. So I've been running resilience and wellbeing work for about 5 years now. My background originally was in outdoor education. And I've been using mindfulness personally for a couple of decades and retrained 5 years ago at Bangor. And since then, I've been working with the public and with workplaces. My main client has been EDF Nuclear Energy in North Lancashire, Eastham 1 and 2, where I've been working on resilience, wellbeing, and also looking at attention and safety linked in with mindfulness as well. So the intention of this workshop is partly to use some of those mindfulness tools, but also to provide the broader landscape as well. So these were the three aims that we decided to offer. And we had a little chat around confidentiality of sharing. So I won't be mentioning contributions with people's names attached, but I will be giving a flavour of some of the feedback that came through. And most of that feedback was done through breakout rooms where small groups could have a discussion. And then when we came back together, we used the chat to just share some key points that were brought up in those discussions. So the first thing we started with was just capturing a sense of welcoming from Diane Richardson, but also a sense of how the current situation is landing for people. And I think the key thing that came out of that was the diversity and the multiple ways that the COVID-19 situation was landing on the ground. So some people talked about financial pressures and business pressures, quite a few contributions around isolation and how people suddenly had lost contact with others. We had people talking about obviously the working to support others within their family and friends who might be in isolation. So all this other aspect of life coming in into the situation. And then a few people mentioning the multiple pressures that were there, the way many of us are juggling. Might be family commitments and work commitments and so on. So quite a mix, but this sense of it landing very differently for different people, but lots of people having many plates to spin at one time. So we then went on to share a little bit of a model around how our minds work in relation to our experiences that go around us. It's modelled on some work by a neuroscientist called Norman Farb, and the details are available in the notes. But he kind of said that we have different areas within our brain which can get involved when we're thinking. So he talks about the narrative of the mind, the storytelling that goes on. And then when we get involved in direct experience, so sensing something that's a sensory experience, something to do with our body or our senses, there's very different areas of the brain which light up when they're studying this in MRI scans. So just a word on thinking. And many people that I work with and many people in the cluster have safety critical roles, and clear thinking is so important. So it's not saying that thinking is a problem or it somehow shouldn't be happening. It's just saying that sometimes our human brains have this lovely capacity to plan forwards and review things backwards in the past, and that's helps us in our critical planning and thinking roles. But these same capacities sometimes this forward thinking can lead into situations where we're worrying about what's coming up, especially in an open-ended situation like the COVID-19, a lot of uncertainty around. It's very rich ground for this kind of future worry. And then the other part is rumination, so things that we think we could have done differently, for example. So we can find ourselves really caught up in thinking in ways that aren't always helpful. And this is where FARB's work is really important. And it's saying, can we choose to step away from thinking in a very intentional way? Can we tune into our senses? So we had some lovely sharing. People give examples of being out in nature, taking their dog for a walk, just the simple act of walking itself. It's a lovely thing to tune into the feet in contact with the floor. Someone else mentioned about drinking a cup of coffee and tuning into the sensations of drinking the coffee and smelling and tasting the coffee, or even a day-to-day experience of having a shower was another one that was brought up. So with all of these experiences, it's very rich grounds for tuning into our direct experience, and we can use that as a counterbalance to thinking. And when we become involved in busyness in our heads, speculating about the future, especially in unknown situations, then we can intentionally come back to the direct experience that we're involved in. And FARB's work says the more you do this intentional shift back to direct experience, the more you're able to observe yourself getting caught up in thinking. So that's his piece of work. So I offered a very brief mindfulness practice, which I'll offer now. It's just going to be around using the sensations of having your feet down on the ground and the body on the chair. So I hope you find this useful. Just a flavour of a very brief little practice here. So an invitation to begin with, just to take your feet, your attention down to your feet as they're in contact with the floor right now. So noticing particular points where the weight of the legs is resting down through the feet. So maybe the balls of the feet or the heels. And seeing if it's possible to bring awareness to the sensations right out on the edge of the skin. Maybe contact with socks, slippers, shoes, or the floor. So being aware of your feet, contact with the floor resting down. And seeing if it's possible to bring your awareness up to include the legs as well, the knees, and the body resting on the chair. And noticing the weight of the torso resting down, just on the sitting bones maybe. So where's that weight most noticeable for you not right now in the chair? So all the sensations of sitting. And finally, taking a slightly deeper breath or two, seeing if it's possible to tune into the sensations of each in-breath and out-breath. Just allowing your breath to settle. So knowing that you're sitting here with the experience of your feet on the floor, the sensations of the body in the chair, and knowing that you're breathing. So just it's a very brief practice, and I've put some links into a SoundCloud recording of that if anyone wishes to use it at all. So it's anchoring using our direct experience as a way of stepping away from thinking. And we'll talk a bit later on about how this can be useful too for pausing and checking in with ourselves. So the next part of the presentation went on to look at fight, flight, freeze. Now, I'm just having a little jump back there to the last slide. A few people talked about yoga and Pilates as well. So this sensing. So just to recognize that. It's a lovely thing to be able to do, especially if you can't get outside. So moving on to the fight, flight, freeze. So this is just to start off by saying it's very much hardwired into us as humans. So the 200 or 300 years the human species have been around, we're hardwired to deal with threats in a very prominent way. The brain system, the amygdala, hijacks everything else we're doing. This naturally kicks in. So if you're noticing any of experiences around the kind of threat response, as it's called, then nothing has gone wrong is the message here. And the little sharing here is to have a look to begin with through some slides to explore these a bit further, to see if you can identify any of these that might be behaviors and thought patterns that you've experienced, and then to have a look at what might be some of the ways of working effectively with these. So the first one is this kind of fight response. So it's the blame, anger, frustration type kind of scenarios going on. So it could be directed at workplace, it could be directed at the government, annoyance there, or it could be within the family, heightened kind of sense of being annoyed is involved there. The second one is around fear. So, the flocking of people to get all the toiletries in a few weeks ago, or ongoing worry, concerns, feeling that in the body maybe. So all of those things could be around. And then the last one of the three is the idea of withdrawing and zoning out, tuning out of what's happening, which sometimes can be helpful, but sometimes people are using it in some situations to block an experience that's happening, and they could be taking appropriate action. I've added in a fourth one here alongside threats. Someone called Professor Gilbert talks about the drive system of how in the face of threat many people really go into overdrive, so really get busy with this, any threats around. So the invitation was to have a discussion around what people have experienced, any of these reactions, or a mix, or something totally different. So the peer sharing that went on was in private rooms there. Time was a little bit short, so we didn't have a big sharing back. But the brief insights we had from people just beginning to feedback was the very broad range of experience. So many people are having different experiences here. For some people, it's a welcome break to have time at home. For others, there's a real mix of these experiences going on, and concerns and fears. And yet for still others, there's a real sense of busyness if they're involved in supporting others. So just recognizing those things going on. And then looking on the right-hand side of the slide here, we'll come on to breathing in a moment. But the first one here in the fight situation is really to cut yourself some slack, understand that tension might be around, and cut others slack. If someone does something that might be slightly annoying to you or not quite right, or they don't do it in a timely manner, is to accept that and link into the commonality of many people out there trying to do the right thing. the flight response. So really helpful just to have a look at small things that you can do to control any aspect of your life, little changes or jobs you can feel some completion with. Exercise is really important here, just to kind of use up the chemicals such as adrenaline that might be around, and also the sense of perspective. So checking in and that this won't be forever. And then the freeze response is all about connecting with others, having this sense of broadening out your experience and making those links. And then the threat drive system, which I added in, is just a reminder of self-care. So this idea that it's not selfish to put some time aside to make sure your energy's been looked after and your well-being. And often, people can overgive of themselves, and within a few weeks of working really hard, then we're often not able to support others or do our role properly. So a bit of sustainability in the system. So each of these responses, it's so helpful to have a breath. So I'll take one myself now. And this lovely quote is a reminder to pause, and the pausing can have quite a few functions. So we've already talked about this tuning into the senses can be so helpful, and maybe taking a deeper breath or two activates something called the parasympathetic system, which is the natural balancer against the fight, flight, freeze threat response. And lastly, the pause is a lovely or useful thing to do to just take ourselves out of the busyness of the day. So often we can find ourselves in the midst of an event or in the midst of thinking, wrapped up in our own stories, and it's very helpful to take a step to one side, just check in with yourself. Particularly if you're transitioning, a lot of us are juggling between work and family. So if we've had a tricky work call, making sure we're having a stop, having a breath or two, checking in with ourselves before we encounter the family or whatever's happening next in our lives, would be very helpful. So other useful strategies, and there's some great science appearing around these approaches. So gratitude and appreciation of others. So gratitude for your own circumstances. So everyday things, very simple things, maybe just having clean air or sunshine on your face, having enough food to eat. So gratitude for these things, just a very simple daily practice of recalling these things can be a great counterbalance to our minds, which have a tendency to have a kind of negativity bias, if you like. We're hardwired as humans to look out for problems. So it's a great counterbalance to do that. And appreciation of others. So I put in a link. The NHS clapping was a really nice example. So in the notes for the British Energy Coast cluster, there's a lovely piece by a neuro psychiatrist talking about the powerful benefits of appreciating others in situations like this. So how that brings well-being to ourselves as well. So this next slide is one that often appears counterintuitive to people, and it's often the case that maybe it's a British thing or a kind of let's get through it, we'll stiff upper lip or brace ourselves against the challenge and keep going in the midst of difficulty. And there is definitely a place for that, but there's also sometimes great value in acknowledging what you're feeling and giving yourself space to feel that. So there's a little bit of a flow to this. So the first thing is to have a situational awareness of what's going on for yourself. So a self-check in a very friendly and curious way. So in terms of your mind, your mood, your body, and you might want to then have a choice. And if you're feeling very overwhelmed, if you're feeling panicked, if you're feeling as if there's an awful lot spinning around in your head, then probably a useful practice there is to go back to some very steady anchoring. Your feet, body on the chair, or if you're out walking, feet on the ground. If you're out in nature, just allowing yourself to tune in as best you can to the natural kind of phenomena around you. If you have a bit more stability in yourself, then it's a lovely practice to do this pausing and checking in. So I'm going to run this as a little practice here for a moment or two. So taking a pause, maybe starting in the same sense of this anchoring we've worked with before. So seeing if you can bring your awareness as best you can to the sensations of your feet resting on the floor and your body resting on the chair. Noticing the breathing in terms of sensations that are going on for you right now. And then bringing this friendly curiosity, this at-and-breath attitude to your experience just as it is right now. So what's the quality of thoughts and mind going on for you? Maybe a busy mind, lots of thoughts appearing, maybe some sticking, thoughts moving on. Or maybe quite a quiet mind. Just noticing the thought traffic as it is for you right now. Checking in with the mood, almost as if it's weather, the mood weather and feelings. And you may even be able to notice that in the body. Sometimes we have a sense of our feeling in a general way in the body. Things like breathing rate and heart rate. Noticing if we're on edge at all or tired. And it's interesting to just check in, see if there's any tension around. Any tightness in the belly, the chest, the throat, shoulders, the jaw. And then finally, giving yourself some space just to acknowledge this experience that you're having right now. And giving yourself some permission to feel whatever you're feeling, whatever's already here. So often we're bracing against our experience or getting ourselves busy, moving on to the next thing quickly. Just for this moment in time, just allowing ourselves to notice, give some space. And without seeking to change our experience just at this moment, seeing if we can invite some ease. So inviting some ease to our experience, just as it is for us right now. So that practice there is one to be very considered around. And as I've said, if you're feeling overwhelmed, then stick with some basic anchors. But there's multiple studies, almost every area of kind of working with difficulty or trauma, or you know, the various schools of thought seem to all recognize the importance of taking this time sometimes to give ourselves space to acknowledge what's going on. And often we find when we do this, then just this bit of processing and acknowledging allows us to take new paths, new possibilities open up, so a little bit less stuck in what's happening. And it does sound very counterintuitive, but it's a powerful and useful practice. And I've put further details in the notes. So a good example is Tara Brach does a RAIN practice where she talks about recognizing, inviting, recognizing, acknowledging, investigating and nurturing yourself. So I'd recommend her work. So another person in this field who's got great things to offer, Professor Paul Gilbert from Derby. He has done a lovely piece to NHS staff, and he's talked about a lot of the above points that we've shared, but also makes the point that the fight, flight, freeze, a reaction, especially when it's sustained over a long period, it's really important to counterbalance this with what I've called the parasympathetic system, but it's essentially, he talks about time to rest and digest. So just building in, proactively building in time to have some downtime and do very little. So, you know, there's often a lot of guilt or worry that we should be busy. When we have a lot on our plates, for sure, there's demands upon us. But it's just recognizing that these kind of threat reactions are designed to work in the very short term. And in the long term, you know, the chronic stress can start to build up. So it's really important to start working with some of these counterbalancing measures. So some of my work at the moment is supporting pilots and flight staff, flight crew who've had radical changes in their lives. One of them is Captain Paul Callan. He's written a lovely piece 2 weeks ago, The Lived Experience of a Pilot. And he does spend the initial bit talking about his work with pilots, but there's a really great section where he takes key aspects of life, and in this same way of building in sustainable care for ourselves so we can really get through extended periods of challenge and difficulty. He goes through the basics with some great references, great tips and TED Talks and so on. So exercise, sleep, he does a great link to some pieces by Matthew Walker, work around diet, the importance of connecting with others, having meaning in life and purpose. And he also is an advocate of a daily mindfulness practice, and that's why I have a strong link with him. So we collaborate on various pieces. So it's a great article, though, really worth the read, and that should be in the British Energy Coast resources. So the last bit of sharing we did was this model of having two arrows coming our way. Some things in life are unavoidable. So in this situation, the virus being there is unavoidable. The decisions being made out there on our behalf, lots of these are offered out to the whole of our society, and we're abiding by them, and they have an impact. But the sense of a second arrow, it's what then happens, what some things are brought into our choice here. So we had a little bit of sharing. An activity you're giving time and attention to that is not helping these days was offered that out there for everyone to feedback on. And one thing it would be helpful to give more attention to. And we had a very strong common theme coming back. The first question there seemed to be very strong around social media, news reports, and while it's useful to stay informed, I think it was very yeah, strong bit of feedback from people saying how that isn't helpful en masse, you know, to have this continuous news cycle. So taking great care around that, particularly times leading up to sleep, for example. And then the helpful things to give attention to, we had connection with others, connection with friends, family. And I think lovely point from someone saying at the end there, the possible, you know, remembering and the broader picture that this will be for a very limited period of time, and any struggles that are going on, to remember to give it perspective as well. So that was the key part of the presentation. We then went on to have a quick look at daily mindfulness practices, and I think it's an invaluable way to start the day. In the same way, it's lovely to do a bit of exercise every day, and I see doing a mindfulness practice in the same way. So it's building up the capacity to become an observer of your own experience, and to bring a friendliness to your experience as well. There's various apps out there. So I believe Headspace are doing one on that kind of captures a little bit around the pressures out there at the moment, and I suspect that might be part of that might be free. There's other apps, 10% Happier. Books I recommended. I was about to hold it up and realised the screen may not be showing. Mindfulness: A Practical Guide to Finding Peace in a Frantic World by Professor Mark Williams from Oxford. It's a fantastic book. Many courses out there. Anyone can contact me. I do run courses myself, but I'm very happy to give you other advice there. Neuroscientist who works with the US military, Amishi Jha, who I follow her work a lot, she talks about mindfulness practice as thinking of it as push-ups for the mind. So it's something to be sustained and used regularly to get the best out of that approach. And I suppose from my point of view, the key thing to remember is when I'm working with people, the biggest way people trip themselves up is to try and perfect any mindfulness practice. So the importance of befriending your experience, not trying to get any mindfulness practice right. Your mind will get busy, you will get distracted, and it's how you work effectively with noticing this happening and bringing some friendliness to yourself. And lastly, I talk a lot about the Attenborough attitude, so a curiosity to our own experience in a friendly way. So that was all from me. Just to say, I am offering work out there pro bono, so free work to certain sectors at the moment. Likely to be supporting some NHS staff in the coming days, as well as pilots. I am doing some paid work, so I'm happy for contact on either direction, either unpaid work if there's a need there and there isn't the resources, or for any companies or individuals who want some support and feel they have the resources. So thank you very much.